There's a moment every grower faces when they realize their harvest just isn't matching the work they put into the land. It happened to me after a season where I did everything right. I watered on time, planted in good soil, rotated crops, and still the yields were frustrating. Then, one afternoon, while reading accounts of World War II victory gardeners and old agrarian field notes, something clicked. They weren't obsessed with fertilizer charts or complicated amendments. They relied on two simple things that powered entire wartime food supplies: mulch and microbes. No fancy upgrades, no expensive products, just a living soil system that restored itself faster than anything I had ever bought in a bag. That realization changed the way I handled every bed I owned, and within a single growing cycle, my harvest doubled. The plants grew deeper roots, the soil held more moisture, and the pests backed off. It didn't happen by magic. It happened because mulch and microbes worked together the same way they did a century ago. Quietly, consistently, and powerfully. Here's how I applied those principles step by step, and how you can do the same. Now, let's take a closer look at how mulch actually becomes the engine that powers microbial life in the soil. You see, mulch isn't just a simple soil cover. It's really the top layer in a living, breathing cycle beneath our feet. When organic mulch breaks down, it turns into this steady food supply that, well, microbes truly rely on. But, you know, the mistake most people make is treating mulch like it's just a bit of decoration. They'll spread a thin layer and hope it will protect their soil, but that's just not enough. But if we look back historically, farmers who depended on high yields without all these modern fertilizers used mulch as the main driver of soil fertility. They'd lay it on thick enough to shade the ground, hold in moisture, and, well, create just the right humidity for all that microbial activity to thrive. So I started applying mulch deeply, no less than several inches, using a mixture of dry leaves, grass clippings, and partially aged straw. Within just a few weeks, the underside of the mulch transformed. Earthworms returned, and white fungal threads stitched through the damp, organic matter. The ground no longer hardened between watering, which was quite a sight, honestly. This living environment, you see, fed my crops in a slow, steady way that chemical fertilizers simply cannot replicate. Building the microbial army, well, it begins with feeding the soil before feeding the plants. Microbes are the unsung workers of any productive garden, you know. You know, they break down organic matter, release nutrients, build soil structure, and help roots absorb more than they could on their own. To double your harvest, you must, well, shift your mindset from feeding plants to feeding the microscopic world beneath them. I started by moistening the soil before mulching. Dry soil slows microbial growth, while moist soil, well, it jump-starts it. After that, I applied a thin layer of compost, not enough to count as fertilizing, just enough to seed the area with a strong microbial community. Once the compost was down, I added my mulch layer thick enough to exclude sunlight, but loose enough to let air through. Within about a month, the soil had taken on this sponge-like texture. When I pushed my fingers into the bed, it didn't just crumble into dust, you know. It clung together lightly, just the way good soil really ought to. Allowing microbes and mulch to work together, well, it creates a sort of natural nutrient release system. Old homesteaders used to say, soil works best when it's left alone. And honestly, that principle still applies today. Every time you dig, turn, or disturb soil, you interrupt fungal networks, expose microbes to sunlight, and disrupt the natural decomposition cycle. So, instead of tilling or aggressively loosening soil between plantings, I began planting directly into the mulch. I pulled it back, placed seedlings into the soft ground, and covered the area again. The plants rooted deeply without stress, protected from drying winds and temperature swings. As the mulch broke down, microbes released nutrients directly where the roots needed them. This system also suppressed weeds, letting the plants claim more water and nutrients without competition. You know, maintaining microbial strength really just comes down to being consistent, rather than getting bogged down in complicated routines. I didn't overhaul the garden every season. I simply added more organic material on top. This layered approach, well, it's the very same method that traditional European farmers use for centuries to keep their soil fertile, all without relying on outside inputs. Whenever a section of mulch broke down, I'd just add some fresh leaves or grass. If the bed started looking a bit thin, I'd top it up. And underneath, the soil grew darker and richer each month. Moisture retention improved so much that I ended up cutting my watering in half, because the mulch held onto the water and the microbes helped the soil absorb and store it. Even during dry spells, the crops remained vigorous with no sign of stress. Applying this system practically can transform even a struggling garden. Anyone can use this method regardless of soil type. Start by watering the soil thoroughly. Add a light layer of compost or aged manure to introduce active microbes. Cover that with several inches of organic mulch. Leaves, straw, grass clippings, shredded bark, or a mixture of whatever you have. Check moisture weekly. If the mulch dries faster than the soil underneath, water lightly. Over time, you know, just keep adding new layers on top as the older material breaks down. This simple routine honestly recreates the same soil-building conditions that sustained wartime gardens, pioneer homesteads, and traditional farming cultures long before synthetic fertilizers ever existed. The results, well, they really do speak for themselves when you commit to the process. By the end of that first season, I harvested tomatoes the size of my palm squash that set fruit earlier than usual, and leafy greens that lasted well into the heat. The soil had transformed from tired and compacted to rich and full of life. What changed wasn't luck. Just the power of mulch and microbes working in harmony, the same way they always have for people who grow food out of necessity, not hobby. If you found this guide valuable and want more field-tested methods that actually work, make sure you subscribe to Husbandry. Share this with someone who loves real agricultural history and help keep this knowledge alive.